attracted to the precious metal space in the late 1990s, early 2000s. I felt that there was going to be transference of wealth and that money was going to pour back into hard assets, and in particular the precious metals. So I joined a team at Canaccord, and we were financing junior mining companies by the tens a week. It was a very fervent bull cycle at the time, and I came to the realization around 2005 that the pure number of companies versus the amount of qualified management was a real concern. We were raising money for these companies, we were making promises and weren't delivering on those promises. So 2005, I stepped aside from Canaccord and I started helping some of the companies that we had invested in previously to better establish their business models and execute on them, and started also then recognize I had a bit of a flair for that. So started being introduced to project opportunities and pursuing them, and that actually led me into Nevada originally. So a lot of capital raised in Nevada, and I've been loving the industry ever since. Well, look, as a chair, you're managing your executive team, because I'm executive chairman, so I manage the executive team, which is of course the paid side of the company, and I interact from that with our non-executive directors. But I also have a very hands-on role on the marketing and capital raising for the company. So I'd say I'm more sort of the corporate development, corporate finance, arm of otherwise what's a very highly technical executive team. So engineering and geology, etc. You need sometimes, not always, but quite often you need a intermediary between. So I work on all levels of business within the company. I would love to sit here and pretend that I have somehow stored that knowledge and use it to my betterment, but the most impressive bull cycle I've been involved in was the sort of 2001 through 2007 cycle. I was a fledgling in the business then, and I did recognize that, one, it's really important to take capital when it's there. I still come from a school of minimal dilution, but you have to dilute when you're a developer or an explorer. You're not producing capital. So definitely take the money is one really important thing. But it's a combination of knowledge that you attain that is almost hard to describe, but clearly as well you have a longer standing career in the industry, so you're better not respected but recognized by the industry. So I think it's just more of a carryover through these cycles into what looks like now could be a massive cycle in all metals, and just knowing how to exploit that, from making sure your stock's behaving well, performing well, you're getting your story out there, but ultimately you're putting money in the right places. That's into the ground and into developing the company. Yeah, it's been very intentional. So let's even break that down or parse that down a little further. We are NASDAQ listed, so a senior US exchange. In the US, an investor wants to buy a multi-dollar stock that's going to double digits. They want to buy a $5 stock that's going to 50. In Canada, so you have to have a tight share structure for that, or an enormous market cap. In Canada, people want to buy a 10, 20, 30 cent stock that's going to $3 to $5. In Australia, they want to buy a 3-4 cent stock that's going to 30, 40, 50 cents. So it's just meeting the expectations of the marketplace that you're in. So, with the US listing, people want to see share price appreciation. They don't understand as well as the Canadian and Australian audiences do. Just kind of a freeboard dilutive approach towards exploration or pre-development. They want to see every news release have some kind of impact on a share price. So it has been an interesting one. My previous company, John Ord and I had Gold Standard Ventures. We learned that in reverse. We had to graduate to the US exchange and then try and clean up, a larger format share structure. So having 16 plus million shares in US Gold Corp is really interesting and intriguing to people. But when they look at the share price, around $16, $17, been as high as $23, the Canadians and Australians get sticker shock. The Americans go to, let's go. Yeah, very good question. So in 2020, we were a study, we were a science test. There was a historic resource there, but could it be construed and engineered into some kind of developable reserve? And ultimately, could you permit that reserve? So that was a difficult time because you had to keep a marketplace in place that would, understand and be patient enough to give you the flexibility to be able to get to those benchmarks. So we were extremely fortunate that people were trusting in us to do so. And what we have managed to do and achieve is quite remarkable in the space of 5 years is get through that entire process. I think in other jurisdictions, you're talking 10 to 15 years for where we're at. So we have a well-defined reserve. It certainly looks extremely economically viable from our previous pre-feasibility study. We're just closing out on a full definitive feasibility study right now, which is, a couple of months late, and we're getting a little bit of a slap on the wrist for that. But look, you want these things to be done right. But ultimately, this project really stacks up. You've got, a tremendous location, logistics are remarkable, and it ties itself into a absolutely solid future mining operation. It's interesting because I don't have the technical abilities to really make the geological engineering decisions. What I rely on is the input from geologists and engineers. And it's kind of an inherent thing that I've picked up over the years is the level of excitement and commitment from, obviously they have to have a backstory themselves and proof of either discovering, ore grade materials or developing ore bodies. Like the CEO we have at US Gold Corp, George B, has built some of the biggest gold mines on the planet. So then I am reliant on their level of excitement and the energy that comes into it, and a certain level of conviction. Guys who, for one, who are willing to write a check. When a geologist comes to me and he's got his own hard-earned money in it, I mean, look, that could be a double-edged sword. Maybe they're just trying to get their money out of a project, sure. But you can read the level of excitement and confidence in the persons you're dealing with around a project. That builds my confidence and excitement, and that allows me to go out and speak to the capital markets and relay that and raise capital. Look, again, we're transitioning from a pre-feasibility to a definitive feasibility, and that's done purely by design for that project level financing. There's a lot of money out there right now chasing opportunities like this, and I'll touch on the fact that we are one of the only permitted, shovel-ready, fully ready to go projects in North America and sitting within a junior. So that is sending a lot of interesting capital our way from a project development capital perspective. But then we also produce a concentrate, copper, gold, silver concentrate. Concentrates are globally in shortage, so we're attracting a lot of attention also from off-takers. And then even federally in the US now, with many of our metals being critical minerals, it's all culminating into a bull cycle with a lot of money chasing opportunities like ours, and we're one of the very few opportunities out there. So it's going to be an interesting 2026 for us. Yeah, it's a real full-time job. You've got so many different interested parties, from bankers, from off-takers again, financiers. Then you've got an executive team who are chomping at the bit. They want to get this project up and running, so they want to just maybe say let's raise equity to go ahead and do it. And then you have a massive shareholder base. We have everything from some of the largest institutions on the planet to some of the highest, most sophisticated investors on the planet. And everybody has a view on how you should be doing it. And they don't all culminate into one pathway. So you have to stand there at some point and make decisions, either not entirely in management's favor because you're needing to, protect shareholder base, or, sometimes they can come close to aligning. So it is just a matter of managing expectations, managing capital, which is all important, and all, getting yourself to a position where you've got a equity value in the company that is representative of where you are with the asset and the time and space at that moment, and then exploiting that into raising the capital where you need be, so you can maintain a strong market, not get too far ahead of yourself at the project level, and just ensure that you're running a business here. So you've got to treat it as a business, and so it's a very multifaceted undertaking, but I love it. Well, it's also changing. It's a forever changing landscape. 3 or 4 years ago, DEI and other aspects of governance were extremely high level importance, and it can be challenging for a junior. 3 or 4 years ago for us, we were still just in that engineering / permitting phase, and to have an overloaded board, have all the different diversity and all those different aspects were a real challenge. But as we've grown as a company, we've also evolved as a company, and many of those aspects that are demanded these days, right down to carbon footprints, etc. It just evolves into the company. So it's really not been hey, we have to really focus over here. It has been an evolutionary or an iterative process that has culminated into the company we are today. But it's something you have to be very aware of. Equator principles for when you want to raise money with established banks, global banks. It is just, it's a learning process, but again, it's an iterative process. Right, so in the state of Wyoming, we are located on state ground. So we actually, through where we are in Wyoming, we deal directly with the Wyoming state government. We don't cross into any rivers or creeks, so we don't have to deal with the Waters of Americas, which is the Army Corps of Engineers, for example. We don't have to deal with NEPA. We deal with the Department of Environmental Qualities of Wyoming, which is located just 20 miles from the project in Cheyenne. So dealing on a state level means that we are dealing with boots on the ground people, again, 20 miles away from us, 3 blocks away from our office, and it's tremendous. It's seamless. It's the same level of oversight. They're just as worried about the local environment and the processes we use for mining as the federal agencies would be, but we're not having to deal with the federal bureaucracies. However, again, I made a comment earlier about the fact that now we're in the critical mineral space in the US, that potentially federal capital might be of interest. But to do so, we have to bring in those federal agencies, which we could also risk upsetting the local agencies. So it is a real balancing act. But we've been massively fortunate. The fact that we are on state ground and in Wyoming is the reason why we are a fully permitted, shovel-ready project. If we had been sitting somewhere in Nevada or Alaska, we would be years behind where we're at right now. So again, the balancing act will more be if we do want to approach the federal agencies for capital. But as it stands right now, very fortunate that we're 30 miles north of Colorado, which is an entirely different state with entirely different rules and regulations. We're in a resource-friendly state in Wyoming. And again, the level of diligence into the permitting and environmental aspects of this project are just as severe and well managed by the state as they would be, not as well managed, very far better well managed than it would be on a federal level. Well, we're shareholders of the company, and so the gauge of our actions and our level of diligence and how we approach our business is reflected directly into the stock. So we are very, very hyper aware of the fact that we are custodians of the shareholders. Now, we are shareholders, but we are ultimately operating with other people's money. So what we do is we try to achieve everything we can on as low a budget as we can achieve, and ultimately, deliver a business plan and execute a business plan to the marketplace in a timely fashion. So that takes commitment to the job, commitment to the project, and a lot of hard work. But that's exactly what we're in this business for. I wouldn't know how many misconceptions there are out there as to what a chairman does, but many people almost see it as a CEO plus role. Others see it as an accompaniment to the CEO. I see it purely as an accompaniment to the executive team. I am kind of the voice for the executive team, generally publicly, even though members of our executive team, of course, conduct interviews like this, etc. But ultimately, I am responsible for making sure that we execute on each of their roles executes accordingly. And at the end of the day, you're the skipper. You're responsible for the ship. If something's going wrong, I can't point downstream and blame someone else. It's a matter of all of us communicating regularly. In fact, right before we're doing this interview, we just had another hourly meeting, and we do several of them, anywhere to several of them a week, and then open communication channels. So it is communication, obviously. I mean, it just sounds so cliche, but communication is all important. But then I have to relay, as the chairman, our internal communications to the marketplace. Of course, assuming that not non-public disclosed pieces of information, but really just projecting what we are doing as a unit, as a company, and me being upfront doing so. But then also on the corporate governance side, I'm then the point person to ensure that we're conducting our business accordingly. So it's definitely a busy role. Well, I'm hoping they'll say that as a team, with me as the point person, that we did everything we could and brought this company together in such a timely and well-managed fashion that they want to invest in other opportunities that I'm involved with. I mean, that is the legacy, is how well you do on this company decides how well you do on the next from an investor perspective, and who will follow you to the next opportunity. So that's kind of my benchmark, is it will translate over to future business for me. So I'm hoping that will be I'll be looked at as being a solid leader at the chairman level.